Captain Jake Morrison stared at the view screen, watching pieces of human ships drift past like broken dreams. The bridge of the USS Defiance shook as another explosion echoed through space. Red warning lights painted everything in blood colors. "Captain, we're the only ones left," said Lieutenant Amy Carter from her station. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see her hands shaking. Around them, the bridge crew worked at damage controls, trying to keep their ship alive. Jake looked at the tactical display. 3 years ago, humanity had controlled hundreds of star systems. They had mighty fleets and proud colonies scattered across the galaxy. Now, floating in the space around Kepler Station, lay the wreckage of the last human defense fleet. Over 200 ships had fought here today. The Defiance was the only one still working. The enemy had come without warning. The hegemony called themselves the rulers of the galaxy. 12 different alien species had joined together to wipe out humanity. They said humans were too young, too wild, too dangerous to live among the stars. For 3 years, they had hunted down every human colony and destroyed every human fleet. "Sir, Kepler Station is trying to evacuate the last civilians," reported Communications Officer Lisa White. "They have maybe 6 hours before their ships are ready to launch." Jake nodded grimly. Kepler Station held the last free humans in this sector. 50,000 men, women, and children waited in the station's docking bays, hoping to escape before the aliens arrived. But the hegemony fleet was already here, spreading out like a dark net to catch any ship that tried to run. "How many enemy ships?" Jake asked. Tactical Officer Pete Johnson checked his screens. "Over 300, sir. Dreadnoughts, cruiser, destroyers, and fighter squadrons. They have us surrounded." The numbers were impossible. The Defiance was a heavy cruiser with 847 crew members. She was tough and well-armed, but no single ship could fight 300 enemies. Any sane captain would surrender or try to escape. Chief Engineer Roy Phillips crawled out from under a damaged console. "Captain, I can give you maybe 60% power to weapons. The engines are holding together with prayer and spare parts." "What about shields?" Jake asked. "We have maybe 20 minutes protection left," Roy said, wiping grease from his hands. "After that, we're naked." Jake studied the tactical display again. The alien fleet was moving into position around Kepler Station like hunters surrounding wounded prey. Soon, they would demand surrender. When the humans refused, the massacre would begin. "Sir," Amy said quietly, "we could try to slip away, maybe find a way around their fleet." Jake looked at his bridge crew. They were good people, brave people. They had families and dreams just like the civilians on Kepler Station. They deserved a chance to live. But if the Defiance ran, the civilians would die. The evacuation ships were slow and defenseless. They needed someone to buy them time, to make the aliens focus on fighting instead of hunting. "Navigation. What's our position relative to the evacuation routes?" Jake asked. Navigator Kate Adams worked at her station. "Sir, if we position ourselves between the enemy and the main evacuation corridor, we could slow them down, maybe give the civilian ships a few extra hours." "A few hours won't be enough," Pete said. "Those civilian ships need at least 6 hours to get clear. Then we give them 6 hours." Jake said firmly. The bridge fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. To buy 6 hours against 300 enemy ships, the Defiance would have to fight until she was destroyed. There would be no escape, no rescue, no happy ending. "Sir," Lisa said, "I'm getting a transmission from the enemy fleet." "Put on screen." The view screen changed to show an alien face. Jake had seen pictures of the hegemony species before. This one looked like a cross between a lizard and an octopus, with cold yellow eyes and rows of sharp teeth. "Human vessel." The alien said, "I am Admiral Zextal of the Hegemony First Fleet. You are the last armed ship of your pathetic species. Surrender now, and we will make your death quick." Jake stood up from his captain's chair. Around him, his crew waited for his answer. On Kepler Station, 50,000 civilians prayed for more time. In space beyond the station, evacuation ships worked frantically to prepare for launch. "Admiral," Jake said, "this is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth vessel Defiance. Here's my answer. Jake made a cutting motion across his throat. Lisa cut the transmission. All hands. This is the captain. Jake said into the ship's communication system. We are the last line of defense between the enemy and our people. We cannot win this fight, but we can make it cost them dearly. We can buy time for the civilians to escape. We can show these aliens that humans do not surrender, do not give up, and do not go quietly into the night. He paused, looking around the bridge at faces full of fear and determination. I won't lie to you. We're probably going to die here today, but we're going to take as many of them with us as we can. We're going to make them remember the name Defiance for 1,000 years. Sir, said Amy, the enemy fleet is moving toward us. All stop, Jake ordered. Bring us about to face them. Charge all weapons. The Defiance turned to meet the approaching enemy fleet. On the view screen, Jake could see hundreds of alien ships spreading out in attack formation. They looked like metal sharks swimming through dark water. Sir, Roy called from engineering. Weapons are ready. Shields are holding. Sir, Pete reported, enemy fighters launching from the carriers. Sir, Kate said, civilian evacuation ships report they need 5 hours and 43 minutes to reach minimum safe distance. Jake sat back in his captain's chair and watched death approach. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with calm professionalism. They were afraid, but they were ready. Well then, Jake said quietly, let's see how long we can make 5 hours and 43 minutes last. The first enemy missiles appeared on the tactical display, racing toward them like angry stars. Jake smiled grimly. The Defiance had refused to surrender. Now it was time to show the galaxy what that meant. Admiral Zexthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion. Around him, his officers prepared for what they believed would be the final battle against humanity. The bridge was huge and dark, filled with the clicking sound of alien technology and the wet breathing of different species working together. All fleet commanders, report status. Zexthal ordered into his communication device. One by one, the voices of alien captains filled the bridge. 12 different species had joined the hegemony to destroy humanity. There were the insect-like Vorthak with their hive minds, the crystal beings called Nexri, who thought in pure mathematics, the energy creatures known as Feltar, who existed partly in another dimension. Each species brought their own weapons and hatred for the young human race. Admiral, said Commander Tietweska, a serpentine alien whose species had ruled star systems when humans were still living in caves. My battle group is in position. The human ship appears to be alone. Confirmed, reported Captain Vexmore of the machine species called Construct. No other human vessels detected within sensor range. This appears to be their final stand. Zexthal's yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction. For 3 years, the hegemony had hunted humans across the galaxy. World after world had fallen to their superior technology and numbers. Fleet after fleet had been destroyed in hopeless battles. Today, they would finish what they had started. Open a channel to all hegemony forces, Zexthal commanded, and broadcast on all frequencies so the humans can hear their doom. The communications officer, a floating jellyfish-like creature, activated the ship's transmission systems. Across hundreds of ships, thousands of aliens stopped their work to listen to their leader's words. Warriors of the hegemony, Zexthal began, his voice carrying to every ship in the fleet. Today we witness the end of the human plague. For too long, these primitive apes have spread across our galaxy like a disease. They colonize worlds without permission. They fight wars without honor. They reproduce without control. On other ships, alien crews cheered in their various ways. Some roared, others buzzed, and a few made sounds like breaking glass. The humans call themselves explorers and pioneers, Zexthal continued. But we know what they truly are. They are chaos bringers. They are rule breakers. They are a threat to the perfect order we have maintained for 10,000 years. In the communication center of the Defiance, Lisa White listened to the alien broadcast with growing anger. The translation software worked hard to turn the alien sounds into English words that humans could understand. Captain, she reported to Jake Morrison, the enemy admiral is making some kind of speech. He's calling us a disease and a plague. Jake's jaw tightened. Keep monitoring. I want to know everything they say. Back on Eternal Dominion, Zexthal was building to his grand finish. In less than 1 hour, the last armed human vessel will be destroyed. Their final warriors will join their kind in extinction. The galaxy will know peace once more. Sir, interrupted his tactical officer, shall we begin the attack? Not yet, Zexthal said with cruel pleasure. Let them think about their fate for a few more minutes. Fear makes defeat taste sweeter. The alien fleet held position around the lone human ship. To Zexthal, it looked like a tiny fish surrounded by sharks. The Defiance was maybe 800 meters long. His own flagship was over 5,000 meters of pure destructive power. Some of his dreadnoughts were even larger. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Roy Phillips worked frantically in the Defiance's engine room. Sparks flew from damaged systems as he and his team tried to get more power to the weapons. The ship had been in constant battle for weeks. Her hull was patched with emergency repairs, and her systems were running on backup power. Chief, called Mechanic Tony Garcia from across the room, I'm reading power fluctuations in the main reactor. I see them, Roy replied, adjusting controls with practiced hands. Keep her steady, Tony. We need every bit of power we can get. Through the ship's communication system, they could hear the enemy admiral's speech being translated into English. Roy felt anger building in his chest as he listened to the alien's words. Back on the Hegemony flagship, Zexthal was explaining the new galaxy that would exist after humanity's destruction. When humans are gone, order will return, he declared. Each species will know their place. The Vorthack will control the mining worlds. The Nexery will manage the energy planets. The Feltar will guard the dimensional gateways. Every world will have a purpose, every species a role to play. And what of exploration? Asked a young officer from one of the smaller alien species. Zexthal's eyes grew cold. There will be no more exploration. The galaxy is mapped. Every useful world is known. The age of wild discovery and chaotic expansion ends today with the humans. On the Defiance, Dr. Helen Ross was treating wounded crew members in the medical bay. She had been listening to the alien broadcast while working on a sailor with burns from exploded console. The alien admiral's words made her hands shake with rage. Doctor, asked the wounded sailor, do you think they're right? Are we really just chaos bringers? Helen looked down at the young man she was treating. He was maybe 20 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, despite his pain. She thought about all the human colonies she had visited, all the families she had treated, all the children who had been born under alien suns. No, she said firmly, we're not chaos. We're life. We're hope. We're the part of the universe that dreams of something better. Meanwhile, Zexthal was finishing his speech with a promise that would echo across the galaxy. Let this be remembered forever, the alien admiral declared. The species that calls itself human challenged the hegemony. They thought their primitive courage could overcome our advanced civilization. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show the galaxy what happens to those who refuse to accept the natural order. He paused dramatically, looking out at his massive fleet. Prepare to attack, he ordered. Make sure some of them survive long enough to send a final message. I want their last words to be a warning to any other young species that might think of following their path. But on the Defiance, Captain Jake Morrison was not preparing to send a message of surrender. He was studying tactical displays and talking quietly with his officers about something the aliens had not expected. The hegemony had made one critical mistake in their victory speech. They had told the humans exactly how they thought, how they planned, and how they expected the battle to go. Now Jake Morrison and his crew knew something valuable. They knew their enemies were overconfident. They knew the aliens expected fear and surrender. Most importantly, they knew the hegemony had never fought an enemy that had nothing left to lose. Sir, reported Amy Carter from her station, enemy fighters are moving into attack formation. Jake smiled grimly. Then let's show them what humans do when someone calls them a disease. The alien fleet spread out across space like a metal storm cloud. Captain Jake Morrison counted the enemy ships on his tactical display and felt his heart sink. 317 vessels, ranging from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed his ship. The Defiance was a heavy cruiser, 800 meters of armor and weapons. She had been built to fight other ships her size, maybe 3 or 4 at once. But facing over 300 enemies was like asking a wolf to fight a pack of bears. "Captain," said Tactical Officer Pete Johnson, "I'm analyzing their formation. They're setting up for a standard encirclement attack. They'll try to surround us and hit us from all sides. What do our computer models say about our chances?" Jake asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Pete worked at his station for a moment, running battle simulations. "Sir, the computer gives us a 0% chance of survival. It won't even calculate how long we might last." Navigator Kate Adams looked up from her controls. "Sir, we're sitting in a debris field from our own fleet. Maybe we can use that somehow." Jake studied the tactical display more carefully. She was right. The wreckage of 200 human ships floated all around them. Broken hulls, dead engines, twisted metal, and floating weapon systems created a maze of debris that stretched for thousands of kilometers. "Pete, what if we don't fight like a regular warship?" Jake asked, "What if we fight like guerrillas?" Pete raised an eyebrow. "Sir, look at this debris field," Jake explained. "It's like a 3-dimensional forest. We know every piece of wreckage because they used to be our friends. The aliens just see obstacles." Communications Officer Lisa White was monitoring enemy transmissions. "Captain, I'm picking up chatter between their commanders. They sound confused about why we haven't surrendered yet. They expect us to fight by the rules," Jake realized. Big ships face each other in open space. Honor and formation flying. But what if we don't play by their rules? Chief Engineer Roy Phillips' voice came over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, I've been thinking about our power situation. We can't fight a long battle, but we might be able to do something unexpected." "What do you mean, Roy?" "Well, sir, if we reroute power from life support to weapons, we could triple our firepower for maybe 20 minutes. Of course, we'd all suffocate after that, but it might be worth it." Jake was starting to form a plan. It was crazy desperate and would probably get them all killed. But it was better than just sitting still and waiting to die. "All stations, listen carefully," Jake announced. "We're going to do something the enemy won't expect. We're going to fight dirty." On the Hegemony flagship, Admiral Zexthal was growing impatient. "Why haven't they surrendered yet?" he asked the staff. "Their situation is hopeless." "Perhaps they are praying to their primitive gods," suggested Commander THYS Escott with amusement in her serpentine voice. "Or maybe they're too stupid to understand they've lost," added Captain Vexmore, the machine being who thought only in pure logic. Zexthal studied the lone human ship on his display. It sat motionless among the wreckage, like a wounded animal hiding in the bushes. "Very well. Begin the attack. But do it slowly. I want them to feel fear before they die." The first wave of alien fighters launched from their carriers. 50 small, fast ships moved toward the Defiance in a perfect formation. Their pilots had trained for this moment, dreaming of the honor of firing the shots that would end the human threat. But as they entered the debris field, something strange happened. The human ship vanished. "Where did it go?" demanded Fighter Squadron Leader Kextal, his insect eyes scanning the area where the Defiance had been. "Unknown," replied his wingman. "It was there a moment ago." What they didn't know was that Navigator Kate Adams had threaded the Defiance through a gap between 2 broken hull pieces, using the wreckage as cover. The ship was still there, hiding like a predator waiting to strike. "All fighters, spread out in search," ordered Kextal. "It has to be here somewhere." The alien fighters scattered, weaving between pieces of floating metal and dead ships. Their sensors were confused by all the wreckage. Energy signatures from broken reactors mixed with the Defiance's own power readings, creating electronic shadows everywhere. Then weapons specialist Tony Garcia fired the first shot. A torpedo came out of nowhere, launched from behind a twisted piece of hull plating. It struck the lead fighter before the pilot even knew he was under attack. The small ship exploded in a ball of fire and metal. "Contact! Contact!" screamed Kextal into his radio. They're using the debris as cover. More torpedoes flew out of the wreckage maze. The human ship appeared for a few seconds, fired, then vanished again behind another piece of floating metal. The alien fighters tried to return fire, but they were shooting at shadows. On the Defiance Bridge, Pete Johnson was coordinating the attacks with cold precision. Target acquired. Fire Torpedo 7. Another alien fighter died in a bloom of fire. Kate, get us behind that broken destroyer hull. Jake ordered. Roy, how much power can you give us? I'm pushing everything we have into the weapons, came Roy's voice from engineering. We're running hot, but we're hitting hard. The alien fighters were panicking now. They had expected a simple execution, not a deadly game of hide and seek among the wreckage. Their formation broke apart as pilots tried to avoid the sudden attacks coming from all directions. This is impossible. Kextal radioed to his command ship. How can one ship be in so many places at once? Admiral Zextho watched the battle on his tactical display with growing confusion. His fighters were being picked off one by one, but his sensors couldn't get a clear lock on the human ship. It was like trying to catch smoke with their hands. Send in more fighters, he ordered, and have the cruisers move closer. But Captain Jake Morrison had studied every battle report from the war. He knew how the aliens thought, how they planned, how they expected their enemies to behave. The hegemony had never faced an opponent that used desperation as a weapon. Amy, what's our ammunition status? Jake asked. We have maybe 40 torpedoes left, sir, she reported, and our laser batteries are running hot from overuse. Then we better make every shot count, Jake said. Pete, target their command fighters first. Kate, plot a course through that destroyer wreckage. We're going hunting. Dr. Helen Ross worked in the medical bay, treating crew members injured by the violent maneuvers their ship was making. The Defiance twisted and turned through the debris field like a dancer, but the sharp movements threw people around and caused injuries. How long can we keep this up, Doctor? Asked a wounded gunner. Helen looked out through a small porthole at the battle raging outside. Alien fighters exploded in the distance while their ship played a deadly game of cat and mouse among the floating tombs of their friends. As long as we have to, she said firmly. As long as those civilians need time to escape. The impossible had happened. The Defiance was not only surviving against overwhelming odds, she was winning the first round. Alien fighters burned in space while the lone human ship danced through the graveyard of her own fleet. But Jake Morrison knew this was just the beginning. The enemy had hundreds of ships left, and eventually they would figure out how to counter his tactics. Still, for now, the ship that was supposed to die in minutes was very much alive. And every second they survived was another second for civilian evacuation ships to get farther away from the battle. The Defiance refused to die, and the galaxy was starting to take notice. Something was wrong with the battle, and Admiral Zextho could feel it in his cold alien blood. His tactical display showed 23 destroyed fighters, but the human ship was still alive. More than alive, it was fighting like a cornered beast and winning. How is this possible? He demanded from his bridge officers. It's one ship against our entire fleet. Commander THY Siska slithered closer to the tactical display, her serpentine head weaving as she studied the data. Admiral, they're not fighting like we expected. They use the debris field like terrain, hiding and striking from unexpected angles. That's not how space battles work, declared Captain Vexmore, the machine being whose logic circuits were overheating from trying to understand human tactics. Ships fight in formation. They exchange fire at optimal range. They follow predictable patterns. But the humans weren't following any predictable patterns. On the Defiance, the crew had transformed from regular Navy personnel into something else entirely. They worked with desperate efficiency, every person becoming part of a deadly machine that refused to stop fighting. Medical officer Dr. Helen Ross had abandoned her sick bay to help modify torpedo warheads in the weapons bay. If we pack these with more explosive material, they'll do more damage, she told weapons specialist Tony Garcia. Doc, that'll make them unstable, Tony warned. They could explode in our own tubes. Then we better not miss, Helen replied, her gentle hands working with dangerous chemicals like she had been doing her whole life. Throughout the ship, similar scenes played out. Cook staff helped carry ammunition. Communications officers worked on jamming enemy sensors. Even the ship's barber had volunteered to help repair damaged systems. Chief Engineer Roy Phillips had done something that would have gotten him court-martialed in peacetime. He had disconnected all safety systems and was pushing the ship's reactor beyond its design limits. Roy, those readings are in the red zone, called his assistant, watching power levels climb to dangerous heights. Everything we do today is in the red zone, Roy replied, sweat dripping as he worked. The only question is whether we blow up from our own reactor or enemy fire. On the bridge, Captain Jake Morrison was discovering that his crew could do things he never imagined possible. Navigator Kate Adams was threading their ship through debris fields with moves that broke every rule of spaceflight. "Kate, that maneuver should have torn our hull apart," Jake said after she spun the Defiance between two massive pieces of wreckage. "Yes, sir," Kate replied calmly. But it didn't. Systems analyst Carl Brooks had been working on something even more dangerous. He was reprogramming their ship's navigation computer to coordinate attacks in ways no normal military AI would attempt. "Captain, I've taught our computer to think like we do," Carl reported. "It's learning to be unpredictable. Is that safe?" Jake asked. "Nothing we're doing is safe, sir," Carl said with a grim smile. "But it's working." And it was working. The alien fleet was in chaos. Fighter squadrons that had trained together for years were breaking apart under pressure they had never experienced. Their pilots were used to fighting opponents who followed standard military doctrine. Fighter squadron leader Kextal was trying to reorganize his remaining pilots, but fear was spreading through their ranks like a disease. "All units maintain formation," he ordered. "Do not pursue the human ship into the debris field." "But, sir," replied his wingman, "they're picking us off one by one. We have to do something. Every time we chase them, more of us die," Kextal said, his insect voice carrying terror he had never felt before. "They fight like demons." On the Hegemony flagship, reports were flooding in from across the fleet. The single human ship was not just surviving, it was inflicting real damage on their forces. "Admiral," reported the communications officer, "Fighter Squadron 7 is requesting permission to withdraw. They've lost half their ships." "Denied," Zexthal snapped. "No retreat. Send in the heavy fighters." But the heavy fighters fared no better. The humans had learned something that the Hegemony, in all their thousands of years of warfare, had never understood. When you have nothing left to lose, you can take risks that your enemies cannot imagine. Tactical Officer Pete Johnson had studied every piece of enemy wreckage they encountered, learning how alien ships were built and where they were vulnerable. "Captain, their fighters have a weakness," he reported. "Their fuel systems are located near their engines. If we hit them just right—" "Show me," Jake ordered. The next attack was different. Instead of random torpedo strikes, the Defiance began targeting specific systems on enemy ships. Alien fighters didn't just explode. They were systematically disabled, their pilots forced to eject or drift helplessly in space. The psychological effect on the alien fleet was devastating. These were species that had conquered galaxies through superior technology and overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that got stronger when cornered. "Admiral," Commander THY Siska reported with confusion in her voice, "our losses are mounting. The human ship appears to be learning from each engagement." "That's impossible," Zexthal declared. "They're primitives. They don't have our advanced tactical computers." But what the aliens didn't understand was that humans didn't need advanced computers to adapt. They had something else. The ability to think creatively under pressure, to find solutions that didn't exist in any military manual. Communications Officer Lisa White had been monitoring enemy transmissions, learning their language patterns and communication protocols. "Captain," she reported, "I figure out their radio frequencies. I can hear their pilots talking to each other." "What are they saying?" Jake asked. Lisa listened to the alien chatter for a moment, then looked up with surprise. "Sir, they're scared. Really scared. They're calling us the ghost ship and the ship that won't die." For the first time in hours, Jake Morrison smiled. Fear was spreading to the enemy fleet faster than any weapon could travel. Dr. Helen Ross returned to the bridge from her work in the weapons bay, her medical uniform stained with explosives and grease. "Captain," she reported, "we've modified 37 torpedoes with enhanced warheads. They're not safe to store, but they'll pack more punch." Jake looked around his bridge at faces that had changed during the battle. These weren't the same people who had started the day as regular Navy crew. They had become something new, something the enemy couldn't understand or predict. "All right, people," Jake announced. "We bought the civilians some time, and we've shown these aliens that humans don't die easy. But this is just the beginning. They're going to send bigger ships next." "Let them come," said Amy Carter, her earlier fear replaced by cold determination. "We'll be ready," added Pete Johnson, studying new tactical plans on his display. The alien fleet regrouped in the distance, trying to understand what happened to their perfect battle plan. They had expected to crush one small ship in minutes. Instead, they had lost dozens of fighters and gained something they hadn't felt in centuries: doubt. On the communication channels, alien commanders argued with each other. Some wanted to send in the big ships immediately. Others suggested they needed a new strategy. A few even whispered about the possibility that they had underestimated their enemy. But on the Defiance, Captain Jake Morrison and his crew were already planning their next move. They had learned something important today. When you're fighting for survival, when you have nothing left to lose, you can accomplish things that seem impossible. The human ship had refused to die, and in doing so, had planted a seed of fear in the hearts of their enemies. That fear would grow and spread, and eventually change the course of the entire war. The Defiance drifted behind the broken hull of what had once been the human battleship Yorktown. Half her crew was dead or wounded, and the ship held together through pure stubborn will. But she was still fighting, still alive, still refusing to die. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, his left arm in a makeshift sling from a console explosion. Around him, his bridge crew worked at stations that sparked and smoked, held together with emergency patches and determination. "Damage report," Jake ordered. Chief Engineer Roy Phillips' voice came over the intercom, tired but determined. "Captain, we've lost 40% of our hull integrity. Main engines are running on fumes and prayer. Weapons are down to 30% capacity. How long can we keep fighting?" "Sir," Roy said with a bitter laugh, "according to every manual I've read, we should have been dead 2 hours ago." But they weren't dead. Against all logic, against impossible odds, the Defiance had survived her first major engagement with the hegemony fleet. More than survived, she had hurt them badly. Communications Officer Lisa White looked up from her station with excitement. "Captain, I'm picking up transmissions. Not from the enemy fleet, from our own people." Jake leaned forward. "What kind of transmissions?" "Sir, it's coming from the Outer Rim colonies. Scattered bases, damaged ships, even some of the evacuation fleets. They're all broadcasting the same message." Lisa played the recording over the bridge speakers. Static-filled voices spoke in English, human voices from across space. "This is Outpost 7. We heard about the Defiance. We're still here, still fighting. Mining Station Delta reporting. We have weapons. Tell us where to strike. Damaged cruiser Intrepid here. We've got one working gun left, but we're ready to use it. Refugee Convoy Alpha. Our cargo ships aren't much, but we can ram something if needed." The voices went on and on. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Human survivors from across the galaxy. People who had been hiding or running or just trying to stay alive. They had heard about one ship's refusal to surrender, and it had awakened something in them. Intelligence Officer Sandra Davis worked frantically at her station, coordinating the incoming messages. "Captain, this is incredible. We're getting reports from 12 star systems. Humans are coming out of hiding everywhere. What are they saying?" Jake asked. "They want to fight, sir. They're asking for coordinates, for targets, for orders. Word of our battle has spread across human space in just a few hours." Navigator Kate Adams looked up from her calculations. "Sir, some of those bases have been silent for months. The enemy thought they were destroyed." Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The Defiance's desperate stand had done more than buy time for civilian evacuees. It had reminded every surviving human that they were still alive, still fighting, still refusing to accept defeat. "Lisa, open a channel to all human forces," Jake ordered. "Sir, if we broadcast, the enemy will hear us too," warned Tactical Officer Pete Johnson. "Good," Jake said firmly. "Let them hear." The communication system activated, sending Jake's voice across space to every human receiver in range. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the USS Defiance. To all human forces receiving this transmission, you are not alone. We thought we were the last ship, the final stand. But you've proven that the human spirit cannot be destroyed by superior numbers or advanced technology. On distant bases and hidden ships, people stopped what they were doing to listen. The enemy calls us primitives, chaos bringers, a disease to be wiped out. But I'll tell you what we really are. We're survivors. We're fighters. We're the species that looks at impossible odds and says, 'Watch me.'" In the enemy fleet, Admiral Zexthal was listening to human broadcasts with growing alarm. His intelligence officers were reporting increased activity across multiple sectors. "Admiral," Commander THY Siskar reported, "we're detecting new energy signatures in 7 different star systems. Previously silent human installations are coming online. How is this possible?" Zexthal demanded. "We destroyed their communication networks months ago." "Apparently not all of them, sir," replied Captain Vexmore, his machine logic struggling to process this unexpected development. Back on the Defiance, Jake continues broadcasts of the scattered human forces. "They want us to fight by their rules, in their formations, with their honor codes. But we don't have to play their game. We can fight dirty, fight smart, fight like our lives depend on it, because they do." Dr. Helen Ross was treating wounded crew members while listening to the captain's words. She looked down at a young engineer. She was bandaging and saw tears in his eyes. "Doctor," the engineer whispered, "do you think we can really win this?" Helen looked around the medical bay at the injured but determined faces of her patients. "Son, I think we already have. We've reminded ourselves what it means to be human." The alien fleet was in chaos. What should have been a simple execution had turned into something they had never encountered. Reports flooded in from across their territory as human attacks began hitting supply lines, communication stations, and isolated outposts. "Admiral," reported the Hegemony Communications officer, "we're receiving distress calls from installations in the Kepler sector, the Vega system, and the Centauri colonies. How are they attacking so many places at once?" Zexthal asked. "They're not using organized fleets, sir. It's individuals, small groups, damaged ships that were thought destroyed. They're using guerrilla tactics on a galactic scale." The alien admiral stared at his tactical display, watching as red warning lights appeared across dozens of star systems. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were coordinating their efforts, sharing information, supporting each other across impossible distances. On the Defiance, systems analyst Carl Brooks had connected their ship's computer to the growing network of human forces. "Captain," he reported, "our people are sharing tactical data, enemy positions, weak points in their defenses. It's like we're creating a living intelligence network. Can the enemy intercept our communications?" Jake asked. "They're trying, sir, but we're using codes they don't understand. Not computer codes. Human intuition, cultural references, shared experiences they can't decode." Jake smiled. Humans had always been good at working together when their backs were against the wall. Now that instinct was operating on a galactic scale. "Sir," Sandra Davis called out, "I'm getting reports of successful attacks. Mining Station Delta destroyed an enemy supply convoy. Outpost 7 took out a communications relay. The damaged cruiser Intrepid rammed a Hegemony destroyer. Each small victory sent a ripple through the network of human survivors. Ships thought dead were fighting again. Bases assumed destroyed were striking at enemy positions. The single act of defiance by one ship had awakened something that the aliens couldn't understand or defeat. Admiral, Commander Tiagleziska reported with something like panic in her serpentine voice, "Our forces are being attacked in 17 different sectors. These aren't random strikes. They're coordinated, targeting our supply lines and communication networks." Zexthol felt something he hadn't experienced in his long military career: uncertainty. The humans were fighting a type of war the hegemony had never encountered. Instead of fleets facing fleets in grand battles, it was thousands of small actions by desperate people who had nothing left to lose. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "shall we send ships to deal with these attacks?" "With what ships?" Zexthol snapped. "Every force we send to chase these ghost attacks is one less ship we have here." On the Defiance, Jake Morrison was beginning to understand what they had accomplished. They hadn't just survived the first hours of an impossible battle. They had started something bigger. "All stations, listen up," he announced to his crew. "We set out to buy time for civilian evacuees. We've done that. We set out to make our deaths cost the enemy dearly. We've done that too. But now we have a chance to do something more." He paused, looking around the bridge at faces that had been transformed by battle. "We can win this war, not by destroying their fleets. We don't have the ships for that. But by showing every human in the galaxy that we don't have to accept defeat, that one person, one ship, one moment of courage can change everything." The alien fleet still outnumbered them 300 to 1. Their ship was barely holding together. Logic said they couldn't survive another major engagement. But logic hadn't accounted for the human factor. The stubborn refusal to give up, the ability to find hope in hopeless situations, and the power of one example to inspire millions of others. The tide was beginning to turn, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 days later, the Defiance was no longer just a ship. She had become a symbol, a battle cry, a spark that had ignited resistance across the galaxy. The name was whispered in hidden bases, broadcast on secret frequencies, and painted on the hulls of ships that refused to surrender. Captain Jake Morrison stood in what remained of his ready room, studying reports that filled him with amazement. His ship's hull was patched with metal from a dozen different vessels. Her engines were held together with spare parts and stubborn determination. But she was still fighting, still alive, still inspiring others. "Captain," called Communications Officer Lisa White from the bridge, "you need to hear this." Jake limped back to his command position, his injuries making every step painful. On the main screen, he saw the face of Captain Mary Stevens, commander of the damaged heavy cruiser Liberty. Her ship had been thought lost 3 weeks ago. "Jake," Mary said, her voice crackling through the damaged communication system, "we've been hiding in the asteroid belt of the Tau Ceti system. When we heard what you did at Kepler Station, we decided it was time to stop hiding." "Mary, what's your ship's condition?" Jake asked. "We have one working engine, half our weapon systems, and a crew that's ready to fight. We've gathered 12 other ships in the same condition. We're calling ourselves the Ghost Fleet." Similar reports were coming in from across human space. Ships that had been considered destroyed were revealing themselves, ready to fight using the tactics the Defiance had pioneered. They had learned to think like scavengers, pirates, and guerrilla fighters all at once. Chief Engineer Roy Phillips had become something of a legend himself. Word of his impossible repairs and dangerous modifications had spread through the network of human survivors. Engineers across the galaxy were trying to copy his techniques. "Roy," Jake called over the intercom, "how are you keeping this ship running?" "Captain," Roy's voice came back, tired but proud, "I got parts from alien ships, human ships, and a few things I built myself. Half of what I'm doing would get me kicked out of engineering school, but it works." That was becoming the human way of fighting. Forget the rules. Forget the proper procedures. Forget what was supposed to be possible. If it worked, they used it. On a mining station in the Outer Rim, engineer Patricia Clark was following Roy's example. She had taken a cargo transport and turned it into a weapon by filling it with explosives and setting it on a collision course with an enemy supply depot. "This is Mining Station Echo." Patricia broadcast as her improvised bomb ship raced toward its target. For the Defiance, for humanity, the explosion could be seen from 3 systems away. Dr. Helen Ross had become more than a medical officer. She was now the ship's expert on alien technology, having studied every piece of enemy equipment they had salvaged. Her medical knowledge had proven surprisingly useful in understanding how different alien species could be hurt or disabled. "Captain," she reported from the science lab, I've figured out how the Vorthak hive mind works. If we can disrupt their communication frequency, their ships become confused and uncoordinated. How do we do that? Jake asked. I've been working with Carl on a new type of jamming signal. We broadcast random noise on their communication channels, and their collective intelligence breaks down into individual panic. Systems analyst Carl Brooks had connected the ship's computer to every piece of alien technology they had captured. The result was an artificial intelligence that thought like humans but had access to enemy technical knowledge. Captain, Carl reported, our computer has learned to think unpredictably, just like we do. The enemy's tactical systems can't predict our moves because we don't follow any logical pattern. The alien fleet was discovering that fighting humans was like fighting smoke. Just when they thought they had cornered their enemies, the humans would slip away and strike from an unexpected direction. Fighter pilots across the galaxy were abandoning standard formations in favor of what they called defiance fighting. They attacked from debris fields, used damaged ships as shields, and coordinated with damaged ground installations to create crossfire traps that alien tactical computers couldn't anticipate. Lieutenant Commander Kevin White led a squadron of damaged fighters from the destroyed carrier Intrepid. They had been hiding in the wreckage of their own ship for weeks, making repairs with salvage parts. All right, people, Kevin broadcast to his pilots. We're going to hit that enemy convoy using defiance tactics. No formation flying, no by-the-book approaches. We go in fast, hit them hard, and vanish before they know what happened. The attack succeeded brilliantly. The convoy was destroyed, and Kevin's fighters escaped without a single loss. On the Hegemony flagship, Admiral Zexthal was facing his worst nightmare. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were learning, adapting, and inspiring each other across impossible distances. Admiral, Commander Tietweziska, reported with barely controlled panic. We've lost contact with supply convoys in 14 sectors. Our communication networks are being systematically destroyed by forces that appear and disappear like ghosts. How many ships are we facing? Zexthal demanded. That's the problem, sir. We don't know. They're not operating as organized fleets. It's individuals, small groups, damaged vessels using tactics we've never encountered. Captain Vexmore, the machine being, was experiencing something like a nervous breakdown. His logical systems couldn't process the chaotic nature of human warfare. Admiral, he reported in a static-filled voice, their tactics make no sense. They sacrifice valuable resources for minimal tactical advantage. They take risks that should result in certain destruction. They fight battles they cannot win. But they keep winning, Zexthal observed grimly. The truth was spreading through the Hegemony fleet like a disease. The humans were not just surviving their attacks. They were thriving under pressure, becoming more dangerous every day. Back on the Defiance, Navigator Kate Adams was plotting courses through debris fields and asteroid belts that no sane pilot would attempt. She had learned to fly their battered ship like it was part of her own body. Captain, she reported, I've found a route to the enemy supply base in the Rigel system. It goes through 3 different minefields and a radiation storm, but I think we can make it. Kate, that's insane, Tactical Officer Pete Johnson observed. Yes, sir, Kate replied cheerfully. That's why it'll work. That was the human advantage. They were willing to try things that seemed impossible because they had nothing left to lose. Every day they survived was a victory. Every enemy ship they destroyed was a bonus. Weapons specialist Tony Garcia had become an artist of destruction, using salvaged alien technology and his own creative modifications. He was creating weapons that didn't exist in any military manual. Captain, Tony reported, I figured out how to turn our garbage into ammunition. These modified containers will penetrate enemy shields and deploy repair nanobots, except I programmed them to take things apart instead of putting them together. The psychological effect on the enemy was devastating. Alien crews who had conquered galaxies through superior technology were beginning to fear a single human ship that refused to die. Sir, Intelligence Officer Sandra Davis reported, I'm intercepting enemy communications. They're calling us the cursed ship and the vessel that death forgot. Some of their crews are requesting transfers rather than face us in battle. Jake Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were tired, wounded, and operating on determination alone. But they had accomplished something that no military textbook said was possible. They had turned certain defeat into hope. They had shown the galaxy that humans didn't give up, didn't surrender, and didn't accept the verdict of superior forces. All hands, Jake announced over the ship's communication system. 3 days ago we were alone. Today, human forces are fighting in dozens of star systems. We started with one ship. Now we have hundreds of vessels using our tactics. He paused, thinking about how much had changed. We set out to buy time for civilians to escape. We've done that. We set out to make our deaths cost the enemy. We've done that too. Now we have a chance to do something that seemed impossible 3 days ago. Jake looked at the tactical display, showing scattered human forces across the galaxy, all of them fighting with courage they had learned from one ship's refusal to surrender. We can win this war, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but by being human, stubborn, creative, and too stupid to know when we're beaten. The legend of the Defiance was spreading faster than any weapon could travel, and with it came something the aliens had never faced before, hope with teeth. The great alliance that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years was starting to crack. In the command center of the Hegemony flagship, Admiral Zexthal faced something no military leader wants to confront: doubt from his own officers. Admiral, Commander Tieto said, her serpentine body coiled with tension. Perhaps we underestimated these humans. My species has conquered 17 different civilizations, but none fought like this. They're primitives, Zexthal insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. They have no advanced technology, no sophisticated battle computers, no proper military doctrine. Then why are we losing? Asked Captain Vex more bluntly. The machine being's logical circuits were overloading trying to process the impossible human victories. Around the command center, officers from 12 different species shifted uncomfortably. The Vorthak insect warriors buzzed with nervous energy. The crystal Nexri flickered with unstable light patterns. Even the energy beings called Feltar seemed less confident in their dimensional superiority. We are not losing, Zexthal declared. We have superior numbers, superior technology, superior. Admiral, interrupted his communications officer, we've just received reports from the Vega system. The humans have destroyed another supply convoy using unusual methods. The tactical display showed the aftermath of the latest human attack. A cargo ship filled with refugees had somehow disabled a Hegemony cruiser by ramming it at precisely the right angle to collapse its shield generators. The seemingly impossible maneuver had been calculated by human children using basic mathematics. How did they know exactly where to hit us? Demanded Zexthal. Sir, replied his intelligence officer, they appear to be sharing information across their entire species. Every successful attack, every discovered weakness, every tactical innovation spreads through their network within hours. This was something the Hegemony had never encountered. Each of their member species fought in their own way, with their own tactics, jealously guarding their secrets from their allies. The humans fought as if they were all parts of the same organism. On a hidden base in the asteroid belt, Captain Mary Stevens was coordinating attacks with forces she had never met. The Ghost Fleet had grown to include 47 ships, all of them damaged, all of them determined to keep fighting. This is Liberty Actual. Mary broadcasted her scattered forces. Intelligence reports an enemy fuel depot at Coordinate 77 Alpha. It's lightly defended, but the approach is through a minefield. Roger, Liberty. Came the reply from Captain Robert King aboard the damaged destroyer Valiant. We'll take the minefield. My ship's already more holes than hull anyway. This was the new human way of war. Ships too damaged to survive normal combat were being used for suicide missions that somehow succeeded through sheer audacity. The psychological effect on the Hegemony was devastating. Species that had fought together for millennia were beginning to blame each other for the deteriorating situation. The Vorthak promised their hive mind would predict human movements, complained Captain Dexval of the crystalline Nexri. Instead, the humans seem to know what we're going to do before we do it. Our calculations are perfect, buzzed Hive Queen ZYXK. The problem is that humans don't behave logically. They make decisions that should result in death, but somehow lead to victory. Perhaps, suggested Commander Krell of the Energy Beings, we should consider negotiation. The word fell into the command center like a bomb. Negotiation was not something the hegemony did. They conquered, they ruled, they imposed order. They did not negotiate with inferior species. The final battle began not with grand formations or ceremonial challenges, but with a damaged human ship appearing from behind a piece of wreckage like a ghost seeking vengeance. The Defiance, held together by determination and spare parts, raced toward the massive hegemony flagship with desperate speed. All weapons, target their shield generators, commanded Captain Jake Morrison, his voice steady despite the impossibility of what they were attempting. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the calm precision of people who had already survived the unsurvivable. The alien flagship Eternal Dominion was a monument to hegemony power. 5,000 meters of advanced technology, protected by shields that could withstand the firepower of entire fleets. But Jake Morrison and his crew had learned something important over the past week. Sometimes size and power became weaknesses when facing an enemy with nothing left to lose. "Captain," reported Tactical Officer Pete Johnson, "I'm reading massive energy buildup from their main weapons. They're preparing to fire." "Let them," Jake replied calmly. "Kate, execute evasive pattern Morrison 7. Navigator Kate Adams spun their ship through a series of impossible maneuvers, threading between debris pieces while dodging energy beams that could have vaporized a small moon. The Defiance had become something more than a warship. She was an extension of her crew's will to survive. On the hegemony flagship, Admiral Zexthal watched in growing panic as the single human ship danced through his fleet's defensive fire like it was choreographed. "How are they avoiding our targeting systems?" he demanded. "Admiral," replied his tactical officer, "their movement patterns make no sense. Our computers cannot predict their next maneuver because they appear to be making random decisions. But the human decisions weren't random. They were based on intuition, desperation, and the kind of split-second creativity that no computer could calculate. Chief Engineer Roy Phillips was pushing their engines beyond every safety limit. Dr. Helen Ross was coordinating damage control teams while simultaneously analyzing alien weak points. Every crew member had become part of a living weapon that refused to accept defeat. "Direct hit on their forward shields," reported weapons specialist Tony Garcia. "Their generators are fluctuating." Across human space, other battles were raging. The Ghost Fleet led by Captain Mary Stevens was attacking supply lines in the Vega system. Mining ships converted to weapons platforms were ramming enemy destroyers. Refugee convoys were turning into improvised assault forces. But all eyes were on the Defiance and her impossible assault on the enemy's most powerful ship. "Captain," called Communications Officer Lisa White, "I'm receiving transmissions from human forces across the galaxy. They're all coordinating their attacks with ours." On her screen, Jay could see the tactical display showing dozens of simultaneous human attacks. It was as if every surviving human had chosen this moment to stop running and start fighting back. The psychological effect on the hegemony was devastating. Species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were experiencing something they had never felt: the fear that their victims might actually win. "Admiral," Commander T.H. Siska reported with panic in her serpentine voice, "we're being attacked in 17 different sectors simultaneously. Our forces are scattered, our supply lines are broken, and our crews are beginning to question our inevitable victory." "Impossible," Zexthal declared, but his voice carried doubt for the first time in his long military career. Plan in human history, using nothing but determination and jury-rigged computer systems. "Captain, I've synchronized our attack with every human force in the galaxy. When we breach their flagship, everyone else will hit their secondary targets." The plan was working. The Defiance had managed to get close enough to the alien flagship to begin boarding operations. Marines led by Sergeant Linda Walsh were preparing to assault a ship that was supposed to be impregnable. "Remember," Jake told his boarding teams, "we're not trying to destroy the ship. We're trying to capture it. We need their communication systems intact." It was the most audacious military operation in human history. A half-destroyed cruiser attempting to capture the flagship of a galactic empire. The battle that followed would be remembered for centuries. Human Marines, outnumbered and outgunned, fought through the corridors of the alien flagship with weapons that shouldn't have worked and tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They used alien technology against its creators. They turned the ship's own systems into weapons. They fought with a kind of desperate creativity that comes from knowing that failure means extinction. "Bridge secured," reported Sergeant Walsh over the radio. "We have control of their primary communications array." "Excellent," Jake replied. "Lisa, patch into their network." What happened next shocked both sides of the conflict. Using the captured alien communication system, the humans broadcast a message that reached every ship in the hegemony fleet. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Defiance," Jake announced, his voice carrying across hundreds of alien ships. "We have captured your flagship. Your admiral is our prisoner. Your perfect fleet has been beaten by one damaged ship and a crew that refused to die." The effect was immediate. Across the alien fleet, panic spread like wildfire. The species that had united to destroy humanity began arguing among themselves, blaming each other for the disaster. "The Vorthak hive mind failed us," accused the Nexery. "The machine being's calculations were wrong," buzzed the Vorthak queen. "The energy creatures promised us victory," complained the crystalline aliens. But Jake Morrison wasn't finished. He had one more message to deliver. Not to the aliens, but to every human listening across the galaxy. "To all human forces," he broadcast, "today we proved something important. We proved that determination can overcome superior technology. We proved that courage can defeat overwhelming numbers. We proved that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning. It's in refusing to lose." Across human space, cheers erupted from hidden bases, damaged ships, and refugee colonies. The impossible had happened. The species marked for extinction had captured the flagship of their executioners. "But this isn't the end," Jake continued. "This is just the beginning. Today we learn what we can accomplish when we work together, when we refuse to give up, when we remember what it means to be human." On the alien flagship, Admiral Zexthal was led away in restraints, his yellow eyes filled with confusion and defeat. He had never understood how inferior beings with primitive technology could defeat his advanced civilization. The answer was simple. The aliens had fought with their minds, using logic and calculations and proper military doctrine. The humans had fought with their hearts, using desperation and creativity and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Chief Engineer Roy Phillips managed to get both ships' engines working well enough to limp back toward human space. Dr. Helen Ross was treating wounded from both sides with equal care, because that's what humans did. They healed instead of destroyed when they had the choice. But the real victory wasn't the capture of an alien flagship. It was the knowledge that humanity could not be exterminated easily. The hegemony, faced with an enemy that grew stronger when cornered, began negotiating rather than risking their own extinction. Captain Jake Morrison's final log entry became legendary throughout human space. Personal log, Captain Jake Morrison, USS Defiance. "Today marks the end of our impossible journey. We were ordered to die with honor. Instead, we chose to live with stubbornness. We were supposed to be the last human ship. Instead, we became the first ship of humanity's new beginning." He paused, looking around the bridge of the captured alien flagship, now crewed by humans who had accomplished the impossible. Every fleet fell, but we refused to die. And in refusing to die, we remembered what makes us human. We learned that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in winning, but in making your enemies understand that defeating you will cost them everything they have. The Defiance finally succumbed to her wounds 3 days later, her hull finally giving way to the damage she had accumulated during her impossible stand. But her crew had already transferred to other ships, carrying with them the knowledge that humans could accomplish anything if they simply refused to give up. The ship died, but the legend lived on. The human species not only survived but thrived, spreading across the galaxy with a new understanding of their own potential. They had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is simple: the refusal to accept defeat. Years later, when human children learned about the war that almost destroyed their species, they would hear about the ship that wouldn't die and the crew that saved humanity by simply being too stubborn to surrender. The defiance was gone, but her spirit lived on in every human who faced impossible odds with the simple declaration, "Watch me," and the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.